A woman wearing a vest labeled Karen is handcuffed and on her knees in the middle of the road, the flashing red and blue lights from police cruisers bouncing off the wet asphalt as neighbors whispered from the sidewalks, shocked but not surprised. Karen had always been a figure of disruption in the community, the kind of person whose voice carried louder than anyone else's at HOA meetings, the kind of person who filed complaints about flower colors, grass height, and even children's laughter being too loud on a summer evening. Yet now here she was, brought down by the very authority she had so often threatened to call upon others. It hadn't started this way, though. The story of how Karen ended up in handcuffs on that lonely stretch of road was far more complicated, woven with years of tension, small battles that grew into wars, and emotions that boiled over until there was no turning back. The neighborhood had once been peaceful, a lakeside retreat where families moved to find comfort and security, where barbecues on weekends blended with the sound of cicadas, and where every front porch had the same promise of serenity. Please subscribe my channel and hit the bell icon for latest uploads. But when Karen moved in, things began to change. At first, she was polite enough, introducing herself with a smile that seemed warm but didn't reach her eyes. She volunteered for the HOA board almost immediately, insisting she wanted to improve the neighborhood and uphold standards. Nobody thought much of it then. After all, who doesn't want their neighborhood to look nice? But little by little, her true nature began to emerge. Every meeting became a stage for her lectures. She would slam down paperwork, highlight obscure rules, and twist regulations to suit her personal grievances. If a child's bike was left leaning against a mailbox, Karen was the first to send a warning letter. If someone dared plant a rose bush outside of the HOA's approved pallet, Karen documented it with photos and insisted on fines. Neighbors grumbled, some avoided her, and others tried to fight back, but Karen always had the loudest voice and the most relentless persistence. She became a storm no one knew how to weather. The tension grew heavier year after year. Families began to dread her knocking on their doors. Children whispered, "The HOA lady," when she passed by. Yet behind her relentless control was something deeper, an emptiness, a loneliness she never admitted, a desperate need to feel powerful in a life that otherwise felt ordinary. But power gained through fear is fragile, and Karen was about to learn that. It began one summer afternoon when a new family moved in at the edge of the cul-de-sac. They were warm, friendly, and unaware of the storm they were about to enter. They parked their rental moving truck slightly angled near the curb, and before the first box was carried inside, Karen was there, clipboard in hand, telling them they had already violated street visibility ordinances. The father laughed politely, thinking it was a joke, but the look in her eyes told him otherwise. The family soon realized they had moved next door to the enforcer, and whispers from other neighbors warned them, "Stay careful, she's always watching." Yet something different happened this time. Instead of shrinking under Karen's rules, this family pushed back. The mother, a calm but firm woman, began attending HOA meetings, questioning Karen's endless fines and exposing the inconsistency of her demands. The father documented every letter, every warning, and eventually rallied other neighbors who had stayed silent too long. For the first time in years, Karen faced resistance strong enough to shake her. Meetings that once ended with her decisions carved in stone now ended with voices raised against her, votes swinging in directions she didn't control. Karen grew desperate. She patrolled the streets with more intensity, snapping photos, filing reports, sending letters almost daily. The neighborhood turned into a battlefield of small skirmishes, trash cans left out too long, porch lights that stayed on past midnight, even the sound of a dog barking too cheerfully. Neighbors began to unite against her, but Karen convinced herself she was the victim. "They're targeting me because I care about the rules," she told herself late at night, staring at the community bylaws spread across her kitchen table. The breaking point came during one heated HOA meeting that drew nearly every resident to the clubhouse. Voices clashed, accusations flew, and Karen stood at the front like a general refusing to surrender. The new mother spoke with calm resolve, laying out how Karen had abused her authority, how fines were misused, and how her behavior had crossed the line into harassment. Gasps filled the room when evidence was presented, emails laced with threats, manipulated rules, and stories from neighbors who had stayed quiet out of fear. For the first time, Karen's power cracked. Yet instead of conceding, she erupted, shouting that the entire community was against her, that she was the only one protecting their values. The board voted that night to remove her from her position, and Karen stormed out, vowing that this isn't over. What happened in the days that followed felt like something out of a drama, rather than a suburban neighborhood. Karen began showing up outside people's homes, shouting about injustice. She followed board members' cars, accused neighbors of conspiring against her, and in her most desperate moment, called the police on the new family for fabricated violations. But when officers arrived, they found no violations, only a woman unraveling before their eyes. The police warned her gently, but Karen didn't listen. Instead, she escalated again, trespassing onto the family's yard, demanding they leave her neighborhood, and refusing to move until authorities were called once more. This time, the officers had no choice. Which brings the story back to that lonely stretch of road by the lake, where Karen, once the self-appointed ruler of the HOA, found herself on her knees, wrists in handcuffs, shouting, "Let me go," as flashing lights reflected off the water. Neighbors stood in silence, not with joy, but with a heavy sadness. Watching someone who had once had everything, power, influence, and authority, reduced to a desperate figure consumed by her own need to control. The female officer who held her arm tried to steady her, but Karen fought even as tears streaked her face. "Justice doesn't," she began shouting, the words breaking apart as emotion overtook her. But the truth was clear. Justice did, in fact, arrive. It arrived not in vengeance, but in the quiet unity of neighbors who had grown tired of fear. Karen's downfall was not because of one family, not because of one incident, but because her entire community finally realized they were stronger together than under the weight of one person's dominance. As the police escorted her into the cruiser, whispers traveled through the crowd. Some felt pity, others relief, but all knew this was the end of an era. The neighborhood would heal, laughter would return, and children could play in the streets without being shadowed by constant scrutiny. Yet Karen's story would linger, a reminder of how control can twist into obsession, and how obsession can destroy even the most ordinary lives. That night, as the lights faded and neighbors returned home, the lake shimmered with an unusual calm, as if the community itself was breathing again after years of tension. And though no one said it aloud, they all felt the same truth settle over them. Sometimes the loudest voice in the room is not the strongest, and sometimes the act of standing together quietly is the greatest victory of all.